Welcome to the Fusing and Prep video for the Quilted Alice Shoulder Bag by Oro Rosa Patterns. Here I have the base exterior piece and the base stabilizer, and we are going to begin by fusing this base stabilizer, which I've cut from Decoville Heavy, centered on the wrong side of the base. Just kind of get that roughly in the center, and you can definitely measure around this edge if that helps. And then I'm going to spritz the Decoville Heavy with some water so that I can press that in place. Now I am using my Cricut press for this. I have my heat set to 320 degrees, which is the wool setting for regular irons. And I'm pressing this for 8 seconds. I also spritz the Decoville with a bit of water before I press. And after fusing the Decoville Heavy, you want to set this aside for 30 minutes so that it can cool completely and the adhesive can cure. And before I set this aside, I like to do one extra step, which is add a woven interfacing. Right here I have SF101 and it's cut to the same dimensions as the exterior base. And I like to place that right over top of the stabilizer. In this case, it's Decoville Heavy. Right over the top of that, because once we fuse along the edges, it helps keep that Decoville Heavy in place so that the edges don't lift while you're working with the bag. So I'm going to press this really well, first over the whole thing, and then I'm going to focus on the edges and just kind of get that SF101 stuck down along the edges of the base. And this really helps keep the edges of the base stabilizer from lifting. Okay. So now my base can set aside for 30 minutes at least before we can start working with it. Next, we're going to be working with our connector pieces. Now, as I stated in the intro video, I am doing the connectors just a tad different from what the pattern indicates. I will be cutting the connectors a little bit smaller than the pattern piece and then painting the edges of the connector rather than folding the edges of the fabric over to the back and stitching them down. That means that my connector pattern piece needs to be a little bit smaller because we're not going to need that extra space to fold the fabric over at the end. We're just going to leave these edges raw and then paint them to finish them off. And I'll be demonstrating how to edge paint these connectors in a later video. So what I've done here is I've taken my connector pattern piece and I've drawn a line 1/2 inch away from all the edges and then trimmed that 1/2 inch off. So this pattern piece is a bit smaller than the one that I printed from the pattern. And this smaller connector pattern piece is what I'm going to be using to trace out my connectors once I fuse the stabilizer. And again, that is all because we are not going to need that extra bit of fabric on the edges to fold over at the end of our pattern. So what I've done here is I've actually cut 2 connectors, but they're just rectangles right now. I cut them 7.5 inches by 3.5 inches. I've also cut 2 pieces of Decoville Heavy the same dimension. So I'm going to turn these over to the wrong side and I'm gonna fuse the Decoville Heavy straight to the back of these 2 pieces. And these 2 pieces of stabilizer are cut the same size as the exterior pieces, so there's no need to center them. I'm just going to give those a quick press. I press the Decoville Heavy stabilizer for about 10-ish seconds. And then we are going to set these aside to cool for 30 minutes. While those Decova light pieces are cooling and curing off to the side, I am going to retrieve all of my cotton liner pieces, and I'm going to fuse each of these with the woven interfacing that I cut to match each piece. Now I am using SF101 for my woven interfacing, and I like to fuse this with a dry press on a very hot setting, and I'm going to keep doing that to all cotton pieces. Now on the cut chart in the pattern, there are 4 rectangle pieces that are very similar in size. So at this point, after the cotton is fused with woven interfacing, I like to go through and label them by just writing with a regular ink pen on the wrong side of the piece. So here I have my 2 zippered pockets and my 2 zip linings. Now the lining is what is going to be inside the pocket, and the zippered pocket, while it's inside the bag, it's going to be the outside of the zippered pocket. So these are the wider ones, so because they'll be on the outside of the zippered pocket, and these are the more narrow ones, they'll be on the inside. So I'm gonna go through and label these on the back side. So this one is the shorter one. That is the zippered pocket 1. And this is the taller one. That is the zippered pocket 2. And here we have the zip linings. Now we have the taller one here. That is the zip lining. And the taller one is the 2. And the shorter one we have here is the zip lining 1. And that's going to really help you during those steps determine which pieces we are working with. And I also made sure to cut them from 2 different materials so it's easier for you to see which one I'm choosing and which one goes where during the steps of the pattern. I recommend doing this for yourself when you're working on your own bag, just to help you not mix up the lining of the zipper pocket with the outside of the zipper pocket. And again, this is the zipper pocket that goes inside the bag, even though I'm saying this is the outside of the pocket. Here I have one of my main panel pieces. And as I said in the intro video, there are 3 different options for styling the exterior main panels of your bag. You have the quilted version, the rivet tufted version, or you can just leave your main panels plain. For these videos, I'm going to be demonstrating the quilted version. So I am going to be stabilizing our main panels with foam that was cut from the main panel stabilizer pattern piece. So it's going to look like this. And I am going to add a little bit of double-sided tape to this. Not very much, just one across here and one across here, just to help keep that foam in place until I fuse it. Now I'm using a non-fusible foam. This is the foam that the pattern recommends. It's the Pellon Sew-In Flex Foam FF77. And I'm going to remove the paper from the tape and place this down on the wrong side of the exterior piece, and I'm just going to center it right on the wrong side of the piece, just like this. Now, in order to secure that foam in place, I've also cut a piece of SF101, the size of the exterior piece. Now, I didn't bother to make one of these shorter than the other one because after I fuse it, I'll just trim off whichever side needs to be trimmed. And that way I don't have to worry about mirroring when I cut this piece out from the pattern piece. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly fuse that right there to the foam. And then I'm going to press down along the edges so that the SF101 reaches the exterior piece. So in this case, my vinyl. And I'm just gonna kind of flash fuse this really quick before focusing on the edges. So I'm now going to go around and kind of focus right on the edge so that the SF101 is fused to my exterior panel, my main panel. And this is a bit kind of awkward with a big press like this, but I can just get that heat plate right there along the edge and fuse that SF101 down. There we go. So as you can see here, our SF101 is fused all the way around the edges of our foam, securing the foam to the main panel. And I'm gonna go and trim off this one excess piece of SF101 right up here, and I'm gonna perform the same steps on the second main panel. Okay, our base piece has cooled and the stabilizer is completely cured. And now we are going to draw little boxes on each of the corners of the base. We want the box to be 3/8 of an inch away from the short edge and 3/8 of an inch away from the long edge. So it's just going to create a little box in each corner. We're going to do the same thing on all four corners. 3/8 of an inch on both sides, creating a box. All right, the stabilizer on my connectors has cured and cooled. So I am now going to lay the pattern piece. And again, I've cut off about 1/2 inch around all of the edges of the connector pattern piece. I'm gonna lay that down on the Decoville side of the rectangle that I cut. And I'm just going to trace out my connector. Oops. Okay, there's the shape of my connector, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Okay, I am now going to cut out each of the two connectors, making sure that I'm going as smoothly as possible around these curves. So here's one connector, and I'm going to do the same exact thing on this other one, but I did want to note that this sort of cinched in center of the connector is going to be where your hardware sits. So measure that center when you're cutting out your connector piece to make sure that if you're using a 1-inch hardware, that this edge stays 1 inch. If you're using 3/4 inch hardware, you'll want to cut a little bit more off the center here to accommodate 3/4 of an inch, because when we fold this over, our hardware is going to sit right here. All right, here are my two connectors all cut out, and we are going to set these aside until the very end of the pattern when we're painting the edges and installing them on the bag.